Tobias, great to see you as always. Thanks so much for joining us. What is your snapshot on the likelihood that the genie can be put back into the bottle, as it were, with this particular conflict, especially in light of President Trump leaving the G7 and criticising the idea that President Macron was briefing journalists with, that he was leaving to try and enforce a ceasefire?
Yes, a timely meeting of that important group, the G7. They come round once a year, but it's fortuitous that it's happening now on the bilateral front, of course, Britain and America getting together, sorting out those tariff issues. But secondly, it's also bringing together like-minded nations to better understand how they can work together, that America shouldn't be going alone, that America and Europe on the same page actually is better for both sides. But finally, and the point that you raise, is how can we find common ground in dealing with not just Ukraine, as you've been reporting, but also what's happening in the Middle East with Iran. And nobody can be more influential than President Trump at the moment. He has actually shown restraint. He was pursuing a diplomatic avenue prior to Netanyahu launching his attack. And Iran as well has shown restraint in not attacking US bases and positions across the Middle East. But what happens next will be critical, and Donald Trump will be pivotal in where that goes. Escalation, miscalculation, I'm afraid, is very much at the forefront now. This is a very, very dangerous situation indeed. And it's good that America has restrained from joining in with Israel to ratchet this up. This is exactly what Israel wants. But right now, America is holding back.
I'm interested, Tobias, you sort of strike such a positive tone on the G7 gathering as having a significant influence. It continues for another whole day, but without the US president there, with the US president tweeting quite an aggressive attack on the French president. I mean, isn't it a great snapshot of how everyone, even if you're part of the G7, the 6 remaining members of the G7 have to dance to President Trump's tune and nothing else really matters?
Yes, that's what we see. That's what you report. I say, having been involved in a couple, that there's an awful lot of behind the scenes discussions that take place. Donald Trump has left early. That's understandable, but it's also regrettable. He won't have that important meeting with the Ukrainian president as well. But given where things are, he has to probably get back to the Situation Room to understand what needs to be done to work with Israel, but to find the off-ramp. Where does this all go? And perhaps that's the biggest criticism of Israel. Make it clear that, having visited the Middle East many times as minister, I was always baffled why more effort wasn't made to restrain Iran's proxy influence across the region, which has been developing for decades, whether it be in Lebanon, Iraq, in Syria, and so forth. But now we see Israel has attacked. Where does this go? Where does stability, where do we find stability, both in Gaza and indeed Iran? What is the off-ramp? That is the big question that Donald Trump and indeed allies now needs to consider.
Do you think there is an easy off-ramp to convince Netanyahu to take?
No, and this is very dangerous. It's very easy to say, let's have regime change. I would like to see regime change as well. I don't think this regime actually has the Iranian people's interests at heart. I think they're in it to consolidate and hold on to power. You see how they treat their own populations when there's ever an uprising. But I just, as a warning, illustrate what's happening in Syria. We had the House of Assad there for decades, a really repressive regime. That regime was finally pushed out, and we now have Ahmed al-Sharia, HTS leader, former affiliate with Al-Qaeda, in charge of the country. Therefore, what happens next is very, very important indeed. This is a complicated country, Iran, and it won't be so easy to have regime change, expecting it to suddenly become a democratic country in a very troubled part of the world.
I wanted to get your take, Tobias, as well on Ukraine. 14 dead overnight in Kiev. Is it understandable for Ukrainian leaders to be disappointed that they feel overlooked now more than ever, or is it only to be expected given another major crisis is unfolding?
Oh, yes, and you go to Ukraine and you feel that huge disappointment that they are fighting the war for Europe, essentially, holding back or detaining Russia, if you like, from advancing and developing greater interests in Eastern Europe, and yet not getting the help a timely help to take that battle to Russia. Every time we've had a debate on another weapon system potentially being gifted to Ukraine, there's been a huge public discussion about it because we've been spooked. We've become too risk averse. And finally, we get there, we hand over the tanks, the F-16s or the long-range missiles. But if they'd have had them in a far more timely fashion, the situation could look very different indeed. There is change, though, in the American situation. We're seeing less of, oh, Russia is actually a good, a good country. Putin can be brought in from the cold, and Zelensky is a dictator. That rhetoric has now gone. And go back to the G7 and the back channels that take place. There's an ability to persuade America to say, listen, it's in your interest as well as Europe's to make sure that Ukraine does not lose.
Tobias, great to see you as always. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.